Unreal 2 is the sequel to Unreal, developed for Microsoft Windows in 2003 and eventually the Xbox in 2004. Developed by Legend Entertainment, who worked on the expansion pack for the first game. It's the Highlander 2 of video game sequels and is a somewhat boring and tedious experience that fails to compare to its predecessor in every conceivable way. You take on the role of a former Marine named John, real original name by the way, who was discharged from the military for disobeying a direct order to kill a civilian. In the game's opening, John is sort of brought back into service again as something of a subcontractor to help the military track down a bunch of ancient artifacts.
So what comes next?
John commands a ship called the Atlantis, and aiding him along the way are his shipmates. Firstly, there's Ida, his second in command, who walks around in a tight-fitting leather outfit sporting some serious cleavage.
Don't know, but you can bet they're trying.
Then there's Isaac, his gravelly-sounding weapons specialist, responsible for outfitting the player before each mission.
If you like, I can tell you about the individual grenades.
You do come across weapons in the game world as you progress through the storyline, and Isaac is frequently upgrading these weapons between missions and updating your existing roster. Lastly, for the crew, there's Naban, the ship's pilot. Naban is basically an alien built out of glowing jello that lives inside a mechanical suit and tries desperately to provide any sort of comic relief during the game's frequent cinematics.
A place called Hell. At least, Ida told me to go to Hell, so that is my plan.
And you will be watching lots of cinematics, from something as simple as watching John fly towards a planet before a mission, to simply showing him walking around the Atlantis. Every single action in the game gets coverage in one way or another, and it becomes extremely boring extremely quickly, especially considering they're unskippable. The game is broken up into a dozen or so missions, and each of these take place on a different planet, each with its own unique environment and design. The layout for each of these missions is largely linear, often sending you in a certain direction to accomplish a couple of main objectives, before sending you back to your ship to complete the level. There's a couple of missions where you get a bit of choice with defending an NPC or a specific location while you're attacked by waves of enemies. These involve placing turrets down or directing friendly allies to defend key points, but this is really just largely for show and you'll be doing most of the work yourself. Unreal 2 also showcases the brand spanking new Unreal 2 engine, which in all honesty doesn't look entirely better than the Unreal 1 engine. At least in this game anyway. It's only really showing off some slightly higher polygon models and higher resolution textures. As I said before, each mission has its own visual theme. The only thing is that none of them are really that appealing. They're cool in concept though. I mean, there's a mission that takes place on an organic planet, where the hills are made out of hair follicles for instance, and one of the later missions in the game takes place in a pretty creepy looking alien spaceship. But none of this stuff is all that revelatory. If this is all sounding pretty boring at the moment, that's because it is. Unreal 2 is just such a run-of-the-mill game in so many ways, it's just painful. From the cliche do what the hell he wants soldier trope through to all the sort of cliches you'd expect to see in a game set in space, you know what I mean. Mining colonies, evil corporations, space pirates, all that kind of shit. Unreal 2 is jam-packed with all manner of different factions and races that each have their own goals and motives. And I'm sure someone spent a great deal of time writing all this stuff up, but it is utterly meaningless. Quite often cinematics are full of expositional dialogue you're not interested in, as characters probe John for answers in such a contrived way.
On an out-of-the-way planet called Tycho, she created a sort of electronic Potemkin village.
Naban frequently asking questions about John's past, for instance, in a cheap attempt to flesh out his backstory. It doesn't help that none of the characters are very likeable, with some downright horrid voice acting. The voice actor for John is just woefully miscast. I mean, here's a guy who disobeys direct orders and does whatever the hell he wants, and in the game he's voiced by someone who sounds like he's going to bounce you on their knee.
What do these things do?
This is the same guy who did some of the voice acting in Elder Scrolls Oblivion.
I've heard Carahill is a powerful illusionist. No wonder she's the ranking mage here in Anvil.
And again in Unreal 2, he just has this sort of snide, condescending attitude half the time. It's almost irritating to listen to. In regards to your shipmates, Ida speaks in this cold, monotone voice, showing little emotion and generally just being a bit of an ice queen.
Don't get your hopes up. If they make this permanent, I'll eat a snipe.
And Isaac frequently makes these bizarre, awkward jokes that I think are the game's attempt at humour.
I loaded some into this ejaculator tube.
I can see what they were going for with this, trying to give the game this quirky, offbeat crew of misfits that all sort of come together to save the galaxy. And on that note, Naban is a pretty likeable little guy. The way he butchers the English language is kind of adorable. But a lot of this stuff is just really hit and miss. Some of the lines are just cringeworthy.
I doubt that. They don't have instructions written in, moron.
Then there's the gameplay. In the first Unreal game, taking on the Scourge was entirely skill-based. Enemies would all have their own attack patterns, and most, if not all of them, fired projectiles at you that could be dodged entirely, or at least to an extent, if you had your wits about you. In Unreal 2, it's just a whole load of crappy, generic mercenary types that use hit-scanning weapons that are often impossible to avoid, while they seem to slide all over the place like they're wearing roller skates as they whittle your health down. Even the projectile-based enemies you do encounter earlier in the game fire so quickly they may as well be hit scanners anyway. Now, this is an old-school shooter with a fixed health system, and you can quick save and quick load at your leisure, but it doesn't make any of the combat less irritating. Also, compared to the first game, the weapon roster is downright textbook. Assault rifles, sniper rifles, rocket launchers, the type of thing you've seen 100 times before. Some of the more exotic weapons do have some cool looking particle effects. The flamethrower in particular is great fun to use when you get ammo for the damn thing. And there's also a grenade launcher with multiple ammo types which each have varying effectiveness against certain enemy types, but this is still pretty run-of-the-mill. Compare this to the weapons of the first game, you know, the Bio Rifle, the Razorjack, the goddamn Flat Cannon. Unreal 2 seems so tame by comparison. John's movement speed is also much slower than before, owing to the fact that he's wearing some sort of power armor suit, and as a result, it often feels like you're crawling through a level. First time I played Unreal 2 again to get footage for this review, I was convinced I had to turn run mode on or something, but no, he really does move this slowly. And it harks back to what I said before, this is just a boring game. I kind of feel like they've thrown in so many different environments to kind of make up for the game's other shortcomings. It's like dangling a shiny object in front of the player's eyes to make them ignore everything else that's going on around them. Except, guess what? It doesn't work. It doesn't work! I can remember when this game came out, and I don't think I knew a single person who was playing it at the time. Most people were spending their time on Unreal Tournament, and no one even mentioned this thing at all. 2004 ended up being one of the greatest years for first-person shooters, and as a result, a lot of good games in 2003 largely got unfairly overshadowed and underappreciated. However, Unreal 2 isn't one of those games.
With all fire, the sack will grow until it splits and a big sucker pops out and goes on the attack.
If you really want to check it out though, I'd suggest grabbing the version from goodoldgames.com, but if you're after a good sci-fi shooter, there's a whole lot of better options out there.